Thank you for tuning in to this video. This video here is an ongoing video from the other one right before this one, where I'm just proceeding just a little bit further before getting into that alphabet of some of the phrases that people, court reporters mainly, have to deal with in court. And I'm going to write a few here for you and show you some of the shortcuts and the brief forms that they use to cut time out in writing. What you have here, you have three phrases. Do you recall? If you recall? Can you recall? Those are two phrases that are repeated quite a bit in a courtroom of law. And let me go over them again and show you the long form and the brief form. The long form is what we just done. For instance, a witness is asked quite a few times, do you recall? Do you recall? Okay, now if I had to write this, out up here, do you recall? Of course, you can see the time it took me in doing that. Or do you recall? And of course, on pen and tablet, you're going to be able to go a whole lot faster. I'm having to write this extra big here just so you can see it. But there's a shorter way to write do you recall, even in Gregg Shorthand. In Gregg Shorthand, if you used all the alphabets, you'd write do you recall. But you have to remember, when you're in a court of law or taking dictation anywhere, you want the briefest form so you can get the job done the quickest to get more down. You don't want to be left behind in the middle of a sentence. So every phrase in your field of knowledge that you're going to have to deal with every day, you want the most briefest form that you can narrow things down and still know what you're writing. Instead of writing do you recall that right way, just write it like this. Do you recall? Just put the R there. Do not finish out the word recall. Can you recall? Just put can you recall? If you can recall. In other words, just don't finish out that last word. That's just one tip or trick rather that you can do to develop brief forms very quickly in the medical field, for instance. People that are in the medical field, they might have to write penicillin all day long. Penicillin. Instead of writing this whole word out, penicillin, like this, just write it out like this. You can actually just write it out like that, penicillin. You can just let those, because you have to deal with this field of knowledge every day. And nobody else has to read your notes but you. So you can just write it pen, or you can write penicillin like this. Just write cillin. Instead of writing the whole thing out, just write part of the word. Remember, you are the only one that's going to have to interpret your shorthand. So those are just some suggestions to develop brief forms in any field of knowledge that you're in. I'd like to touch on just a few more before we go into the alphabet here. In courtrooms, you see this phrase quite a bit. At the time. At that time. See how quick that is? Now on the, this is at, this is the, this is time. This is at, that is that, and this is time. If you notice, I connected them all three together. And that's one way that picks up speed. In Gregg Shorthand, every time you hear the attorney question the witness, Mr. Don, at the time of the incident, do you recall at 8 o'clock during that day where you were? Well, at that phrase, you're going to hear that phrase in court, at the time, quite a bit. You can write it at the time. And that's how that would be wrote on a Gregg Shorthand tablet. Of course, this would be down here, this would be right here, at the time. But instead of writing it like that, you want to do it the quickest way you can. So every time you hear that phrase, at the time, you just connect it all together. Or at that time, you just connect it all together. It's much more quicker that way. Also, let me show you something else before we go into the alphabet. And that is just how quickly brief forms can be. For instance, if I wanted to write out a question, have you ever been to California? Now watch this. Have you ever been to California? And of course, when you do a question mark in Gregg Shorthand, it's actually just a little X. But have you ever been to California? Have, the word have in Gregg Shorthand is just always a V. Have you ever been to California? K-A. Okay, now there's a quicker way to write that, and I hope that some of you really will adopt that phrase, have you ever been, with the brief form that I'm about to show you. Whenever I hear dictation, if I hear that terminology, have you ever been? Now watch the brief form here. Have you ever been to California? It's almost as fast as you can say it. Now, my brief form for have you ever been, I write the word have. I come down with the V. That is the word have. If you look up in a Gregg Shorthand dictionary, that, and of course, you can even write, once again, if you want to use all the alphabet, you can put H, A, V. But in the shorthand dictionaries, you're going to see it like this, have. So when I hear that phrase, have you ever been, I write the word have, and I cross it with a B, and I have purposed in my mind that is going to be my brief form for have you ever been. So I'm doing this and putting this on display, not only to help you just with this one particular brief form, but to show you how brief forms are actually developed. Just like in our English language, and I've covered this before, you can write out the word medical doctor, or you could just write out MD. You can write out the word railroad, or you could just write out the word RR. Well, it works that way in shorthand. Anything that cuts down the time, that's what you're looking for. You're trying to develop the most briefest forms you can. Now, believe it or not, we're getting ready to get into the alphabet. And before some of you start objecting to what I'm about to write, because I realize that C, there is no C in Gregg Shorthand, but I'm going to list something as C, and I'm going to go back and explain that just a little bit. There is no W in shorthand. There is no Y in shorthand, but I'm going to list something for each one of those, and I'm going to explain it to you, how that works in just a moment. So let me put some lines down here. Now these lines I'm writing at a slant. They're not going to be exactly straight. Okay. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Let me make sure let's see my board here, I'm going to have to get a little bit over, okay? I, J, now notice this J here, it looks like the D. The D I went up, the J I come down. J, K, L, M, N, O, P. Okay? Now, watch this. I know that there's not no Q in Gregg Shorthand, but I'm going to list something and I'm going to explain it to you. It falls under one of the rules of Gregg Shorthand when you're faced with something, writing something with a Q. So I'll explain it in a little bit. Q looks like a K, doesn't, with a little mark on it. Q, R, S, T, U, V. Watch this. W, X, Y. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, wait, now there's no Y in Gregg Shorthand. I'm going to explain that in just a little bit. And I'm going to show you why you need to adopt something for a Y in certain cases. I don't know why John Robert Gregg did not include a Y in the Gregg Shorthand alphabet. Because of it, it has led to some confusion when writing certain words, but I'm going to cover all that. And I'm going to show you why this little stroke right here, in some instances, it would be best to use that over the first alphabet, which is supposed to be a Y in a given word that you're going to be writing. Okay, Y, Z. Now, X and Z, you could actually write a Z either way. You can write it this way, or you can write it this way. Also, an S, if you notice an S, an X, and a Z are like the same. And you can write even the S in the opposite direction. You can write the S that way. The X, you can write it either way. The Z, you can write it either way. But now, some of these alphabets, okay, let's go over one by one. First, the A, and by the way, if you notice some go up to the top of the line, I should have actually put a line right up here across the top too. Forgive me for these lines here. Some alphabets go to the middle, like the F and the P. Some of them go all the way up to the top, like the B and the D. I should have had that top line drawn up there. And there's a B, excuse me, all the way to the top. There's a J, from top to bottom. So, and of course we're going to get into a number of other things like den, D-E-N, like in the word dentist. Ten, T-E-N, like in the word tennis. We're going to get into a lot of prefixes where there's other strokes up here that deals with the prefixes. But right now, I'm going to try to do something better on this board and make these alphabets look better. I'm going to go over one at a time with you and go a little slowly so you can come to a better understanding. Okay, now let's look at A first. Okay, let me draw the lines. And by the way, in just a little while, I'm going to try to try something with my tablet. I've looked at those electronic tablets that some have used, and from what I'm seeing on the web about them, they're just not up to par that would please me anyway right now. So I think I'm actually going to get a pen and ink here in a little while, and I'm going to reconfigure the camera in such a way to where the camera will only take up the pen and ink Gregg Shorthand tablet that you will be able to see me actually write all this on. And I'm going to try that too, and see how that works out. So I'm going to try it both ways. But those of you who have bared with me through the little board deal here, I appreciate that so much. And hopefully I hope to be moving on to better displays here in a little while. Okay, let's look at A. A really, well let me start on this line because we've got a line up here and a line there. A is like 1/3 of the distance. Now, well, let me drop A for just a moment. Let me show you something. S, P, B, S, or Z, or that could be an X, F, V. You see how a lot of strokes are the same, but they're just different lengths? Watch M, M, N. You see how they're the same, but they're just different lengths? Well, that's why it's so important to be very precise on every length of stroke that you write in Gregg Shorthand. Okay, now let's go back to A. So if you hear me stressing at times, about the length, there's a reason for that. Because if you go too long with one of your strokes and you mean it to mean a certain alphabet, as soon as you exceed the length that's supposed to properly represent that alphabet, when you yourself even go back to read it, you're going to have difficulty. Okay, let's look at A. A. It looks like a little egg kind of tilted to its side. And that is your A. Now, sometimes in any word that begins with A, you can actually lay that word on its side. You can lay that alphabet on its side. We can keep it in that direction if we write the word bay, B-A, or if we want to write the name Al, we could lay it on its side to match the L. The word where. There's two ways to write the word where. We can write A, R, and put a little, I'm going to cover that with you here when we're dealing with the Q and the W. About that little line, that's another little rule when you're dealing with a Q or a W, about putting that little line under the first alphabet. Or you can write where like this, W-A-R. So you can write the W like that, or you can write the word and put this under it and it becomes a W. Or if we had a K and you put that under there, that would denote that that's probably a Q, that the K stands for a Q. It looks like I'm running out of time, so let me stop the video and catch me on the next one. Thank you.